your thoughts about various examples that you have seen that may relate not just to all the major issue of disorder of the day, but in particular to identity politics, Mike.
Well, look, I think that what happened to George Floyd was a tragedy, but I think what the caller was getting at was, for example, we saw with the New York Times, James Bennett, the editor of the editorial page, who was fired about a month and a half ago for publishing an op-ed by a sitting U.S. Senator, Tom Cotton, and the op-ed was supporting the view of 58% of the American people, which was to use the military to establish peace in our cities. For just publishing the opinion of a sitting U.S. Senator with which the country agreed, he was fired. The editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, who had been the editor for years, was fired because he published an opinion saying that buildings matter too. And the list is very long. Andrew Sullivan, who is not a Trump supporter, who dislikes Trump very much, who's a gay man, he was fired by New York Magazine for having the temerity to question identity politics. And by the way, maybe your listeners would benefit from hearing what identity politics is.
Give us a precise definition, please.
It is simply the division of the country into groups that are based on race, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, gender, even disability status, anything that confers a degree of victimhood on the members of these groups. These groups, by the way, Jim, are oftentimes artificially created by the bureaucracy. We can get into that. But anyway, this victimhood then is used to demand respect, to demand attention, to demand rewards, to demand compensatory justice, to demand benefits, which means that then victimhood never gets solved. On the contrary, so there's no incentive to ever resolve your victimhood, to overcome your victimhood. We should draw our claims on respect for our ability to overcome the curves that life throws our way. But not only do you have no incentive to solve your problems, you want your grievances are going to be nursed forever. We're going to end up where we are today in the summer of 2020, where we have people filled with grievances. Why? Because these grievances have been instilled into them. To this day, we can go through that if you want to, what
Sure.
the strategy is.
No, but I agree with you, and I think that it's worth going through. And of course, why should you do away with these grievances? Why should you make things better when you would be taking away the livelihood of people who are making a pretty good living in the grievance industry?
Exactly. And let me just last week. Three women who are charter members of the ultra-left, Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times, 1619 Project, Alicia Garza of Black Lives Matter organization, and Maria Teresa Kumar, the CEO of the group Voto Latino, got together, and I watched their exchange, their talk. I transcribed most of it. Here is what Kumar says about her group. I'm going to read to you. Quote, "The challenge with the work that I do at Voto Latino is that I can't get people agitated because oftentimes they don't know the great harm that has happened under the structures that we have been raised by. But once they start understanding it and recognizing it, they act and react and fight and run for office," unquote. In other words, she's saying that she's taking immigrants from Latin America who were attracted here, like my family was, by the conditions of opportunity that this country bestows on people, and she, in her group, is instilling in these immigrants a sense of victimhood about these conditions in order for these conditions to be changed, in order for capitalism to be replaced with a new economic system that redistributes wealth. This is what's happening, and it's everywhere. And if you don't notice, that's the reason I wrote my book, The Plot to Change America. This is it, Jim. This is the crux of it.
Yeah, so it certainly ought to be. I mean, the idea that people are so victimized that they're not even aware that they're being victimized, that it has to be pointed out to them. You say you're happy? You're working your way up the ladder? No, you're not. Let me tell you how bad off you really have it. I mean, what a wonderful message.
But actually, the thing is, though, that it has a very old genesis, a very old pedigree. This is something that communist leaders, from Antonio Gramsci in the 20s to Herbert Marcuse in the 60s, they all talked about this. Marcuse, I happen to be writing this at the moment. Marcuse used to say that liberation depends on the consciousness of servitude. In other words, people have been told how victimy they are. In fact, Marcuse, sitting here in the 60s, noticed that the American worker was just way too contented. He was never going to rise up. And he wrote, the people find themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home, and kitchen equipment. In other words, these poor American boobs that had given him a home were too happy to ever overthrow the system. So they had to be taught how unhappy they were.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for your public service. We do appreciate very much. All right.